Friday, May 4th, 1990, and we're in my home in Cleveland, Ohio. Pat and the children and I have lived here for almost 2 years, and we've just been delighted this week to have Grandma Carpenter with us. She's been here for about a week, and we've just been having a wonderful visit. Grandma is going to be 80 years old this December, and Pat and I have been commenting all this week about what a wonderful memory Grandma has. How she can remember dates and names and things that have happened from years and years ago so clearly. And we're going to have Grandma talk to us a little bit about my heritage, about her family, about where our family came from, her parents and grandparents, and we'd like to have this be a permanent record that we can pass on to our children and grandchildren. So Grandma, why don't you just talk to the camera and tell us things that you remember.
Well, my grandparents on my mother's side came from Norway, and my grandfather was born and grew up in a little fishing village called Arendal, and my grandmother was from a little village called Amelie. And they both, they didn't know each other before they came to America, but as they came over on the boat, my grandfather saw her, and he remarked to one of his relatives that that was the girl he was going to marry. So when they got to Ellis Island, I'm sure he must have approached her with the plan of getting married, and it must have sounded agreeable to her, because when they got to Chicago, they got married. Then they went to South Dakota, where they filed on a claim so that they could live on a piece of land and it would become theirs.
What part of South Dakota was that?
That was at Canton, South Dakota, near Sioux Falls. And
what were their names?
And their name was Asbjørn Gunderson and Annie Agnes. Then my grandparents on my father's side, their name was John Sherritt and Harriet Newell. She was known as Hattie, but her name was Harriet.
Where were they from?
And well, my grandparents' family came from, or my grandfather's family came from Ohio, and I don't really know about my grandmother's family, but they settled in Iowa and had a farm. And my father was the oldest of 5 children, and my mother was second oldest of 8 children.
What part of Iowa did they live in?
And they lived in Buchanan County, Iowa.
Well, what country did the Sherritts come from? What ancestry?
I think they were sort of a mixture of English and German. And my father always said he was Scotch, Irish, Dutch, Yankee, if anybody asked him what his nationality was. Well, then I had 8. I was one of 8 children. I was the eldest, and I had 5 sisters and 2 brothers. And of course, we had a really good time as children, because there was a lot of us to play ball and do all the things that kids do.
Now, your parents' names were?
My father's name was Albert, and my mother's name was Annie. And my father, how my parents met, my father went to South Dakota. He drove his team and wagon out to South Dakota to do freighting, because at that time there wasn't any railroads that went west of the Missouri River. So he took his team and wagon, went out there to haul freight. And while he was there, he met my mother. And they got married and then came back to Iowa to live. And during my childhood, my father's parents lived in the same little area where we did, and I spent a lot of time with them. It was when I used to go and visit my grandfather that I heard the first radio, which was really something, that you could hear voices and know that people were talking and that we were able to listen to it. It was really a wonderful thing. And as I grew up, it seemed like I was always having to take care of kids. But as I grew older, I learned to appreciate each and every one of my brothers and sisters and had a lot of good times with all of them.
Now, what year were you born?
I was born in 1910, and
So you were just a young woman when the Depression began.
well, actually, the Depression, what was really the Depression, hadn't really started yet. At the time I was married, it was 1929, and later that year was when the stock market crashed in Wall Street and was the cause of the Depression. I met Carl just...
Do you want to tell us about Grandpa's family
Oh,
before
I
you...
should talk about Grant. Yeah, Carl's parents. Well, first, let's talk about that I met him. And at that time,